I was inside doing dishes or doing something in the kitchen when my youngest son ran in and yelled, "Dad, get your camera!" So I didn't really stop to think or ask a lot of questions. I just grabbed my D750, which had my macro lens on it, and ran outside to see what was going on, like why I needed to grab my camera. And wow, he was right. I'm glad I didn't waste time asking a bunch of questions or trying to figure out the details. I just grabbed my camera and went outside to meet my son and my wife, who were planting some strawberries in the backyard. And we saw these gigantic moths. I mean, it's a moth, so it's small, but it was big as far as moths go. We all thought they were hummingbirds at first. And when I got out there to where they were planting strawberries, he pointed and he said, "Look, there's hummingbirds." And that's what we thought they were. But, and so right away I could tell, like, okay, I understand now. This is why he wanted me to get the camera. So I didn't really know what to do. Like, how do you capture a hummingbird, or in this case, a moth? Like, we didn't know it was a moth. We thought they were hummingbirds, but either way, these tiny little, really fast moving creatures, how do you capture those with just a camera and a macro lens? So I didn't have a lot of time to think, and I knew I needed a fast shutter. Beyond all else, I had to have a fast shutter. So you guys know by now, I always use auto ISO because I don't really care about ISO. Even ISO 6400 looks fantastic on the D750. So ISO doesn't really matter to me. So I just set the minimum shutter speed. I went to the auto ISO. I set the minimum shutter speed to 1/1500th of a second, which, not knowing anything about how fast these little wings beat, I figure, well, that surely must be fast enough to freeze movement and motion. And I think it was. The blur you're seeing here is mostly due to depth of field, but it's also a little bit due to motion. If you look at the wing tips, you can see just a little bit of what looks like motion blur as opposed to depth of field blur. So I set the shutter to the minimum shutter speed of 1/1500th of a second, and I dialed in. Boy, I think I started with a wider aperture of like f3.2 or something, or 3.5. And I just sat there, like I laid down on the ground in this little patch of flowers right next to strawberries. And I just like pointed, and I guess the term that they used to use, they still use this term. It's called spray and pray, where you just sort of take a ton of photos and hope that one turns out. I don't really like that technique normally, but man, like I didn't really know what else to do here. So I just sat down, or I laid down on the ground and pointed my camera at these things and just fired away, hoping one of the shots would be good. And in this particular one, which, I mean, there were several good ones to choose from, but this particular one, first of all, this is not cropped at all. This is exactly straight out of camera. The only edits are just a little bit of my usual color edits in Lightroom, like lower the black levels, lower the, raise the white levels, just to get that sharp, contrasty look. But this is not cropped or tilted or anything. This is exactly how it was shot. And I really like how the hummingbird moth, which I think this is, I think that's what this is, a hummingbird moth. That plus the flower it was going to fill the entire frame and don't quite reach out of the edges of the frame. I just, the way that this turned out is so, I don't know if I'd say ideal, but it's really good. And you can see the little proboscis starting to uncurl. And I got several shots where this little moth, there were actually two of them, where they were drinking. But this one seemed cool because you could tell it was about to start drinking. So there's motion implied here. There's motion of the wings, but also the implied motion of this little proboscis about to unfurl. And so it just feels like this photo is teeming with life and with motion. And it also seems like the little flying creature is looking straight at me, which I thought was kind of cool. I took, I don't know, 100 shots. and even though several of them turned out okay, this one, out of all of them, this one just like hit it ticked every box that I would want to check. Right down to, like I said, the lack of any cropping, but also the depth of field. Like I nailed focus right on that eye. and everything behind it and in front of it is out of focus, but that eye is tack sharp. So I don't really know if I'll ever get to do another photo like this. I'll have to tell my son to keep his eye open and make sure I keep my camera ready. But this is such a fun photo to take. And in some ways, like, I don't want to say the culmination because that implies that it's ending. But this is another example of how you can get great photos if you continue to learn from and build on what you've done before.